Our second reading this morning comes to us from the book of Exodus, chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of Israelites journeyed by stages, as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people there thirsted for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people, and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and the water will come out of it, so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" This is the word of the Lord. So, as I've mentioned before, the Revised Common Lectionary is a 3-year schedule of suggested Bible readings that many churches follow. It's a fairly good way to make sure that you are reading Scripture somewhat broadly and not just getting a pastor's favorite stories every other month, which I guarantee you that you would be. Not just from me, from pastors generally. We all have favorite stories. There are some readings that come up multiple times every year, like the 23rd Psalm, which comes up 6 times in each 3-year cycle. There are some readings like the Christmas and Easter stories that come up every year. This reading from Exodus comes up twice per cycle, but some readings like today's gospel story only come up once per cycle. Most of you were not here on the 3rd Sunday in Lent, the last time we were in lectionary year A. I remember that very vividly because the date of the last Lent 3A was March 15th, 2020. It was the last Sunday of what I have been referring to for quite a while as the before times. For the next 68 Sundays, we worshiped at home. I very quickly lost count of how many times I very dryly made an offhand comment about how I never expected to relate so strongly to the plight of the Israelites lost in the wilderness for what felt like forever before they could reach the Promised Land, or the plight of the Israelites many generations later when they found themselves in exile from the Promised Land after they had been conquered. But God was still with the Israelites, even when they were lost, even when they were homesick, even when they were terrified, even when they were thirsty, even when they were angry, even when they were rebelling, even when they were complaining. No matter what, God was with them. It didn't always make sense. Things didn't always go the way Israelites wanted things to go. Sometimes there were venomous snakes. Sometimes there was a seemingly endless monotony of the same rations, the same landscape, the same chores, the same faces, the same longing for a different life, day in and day out. Sometimes there were arguments. Very often there were arguments. Sometimes those arguments broke out into fights. Sometimes the weight of their loneliness, lost in a barren wasteland, seemed unbearable, like that loneliness had manifested itself as physical pain. Sometimes the sun would set on a deep, abiding sense of frustration and disappointment and an existential dread that none of their hopes or dreams or prayers would ever be realized. I'm talking about the Israelites still, I swear. But they'd been brought out of Egypt, and I'm sure they were grateful for that, but now they faced an indefinite future, and they were probably already sick of the word unprecedented. And they very literally could not go anywhere, and basic supplies like water were in short supply. Anyway, this week I was thinking about the wilderness and about how the Israelites longed for water, and about the Samaritan woman at the well, and how Jesus offered her living water, and how she was so overwhelmed and ecstatic to have met the Messiah that in her haste to get back to her village, she left her water jar behind. I thought about how it was a group effort for not only Moses, but also the other elders to bring God's water to the people. I thought about how meeting Jesus didn't just change the life of one Samaritan woman. That meeting changed the lives of her whole community. I thought about the ways that we offer water to each other, literally and metaphorically. I thought about a lot of things. As somehow keeps happening to me lately, there were at least 3 different sermons I almost wrote. Y'all came about this close to getting a whole sermon about the old folk song, Desert Feet. But ultimately, what I thought about the most was the last time that today's 2 readings came together in the lectionary cycle. It is a blessing and a relief to have come as far as we have since that day, and to know that God kept the promise God made to us, that God would never abandon us. We wouldn't be worshiping together in person next Sunday or the Sunday after that, I told you 3 years ago. I didn't know when it would be safe for us to worship together here again, and that was really sad. Those 68 Sundays apart still hurt. But as we went into the wilderness of isolation, I wanted us to remember the unnamed Samaritan woman. As either a widow or a divorcee 5 times over, she is an outcast in her society of outsiders. Remember that the Jews and the Samaritans were enemies. Jews considered Samaritans to have false beliefs. Samaritans considered Jews to have false beliefs. And Samaritans considered this woman to be fundamentally broken because she'd had 5 husbands. I can't even imagine how lonely she must have been. We even see her going to fetch water in the middle of the day, the hottest part of the day. Has she been shunned by the other women who would have gone in the morning to fill their jars from the well? Has she chosen to go at noon of her own accord, just to avoid their judging eyes? She knows the stories of her people, and she knows the differences in beliefs between her people and Jews like Jesus. And I imagine her feeding her soul with scraps of overheard conversations and lessons, lingering while teachers taught their young students so that she could learn as much as she could. I imagine her having conversations in her head and wishing she had someone to talk to. I couldn't even imagine how lonely she must have been, I said then. I think I can imagine it now. But then comes Jesus, a Jewish man, the last sort of person she would have expected to speak to her, of all people. He has sought her out, outside of town by the ancient well, even at the hottest part of the day when no one else would be there. And he doesn't look down on her or scold her or condemn her or brush her off. He engages in conversation with her and treats her as an equal. Who could ever imagine that there could be a place in the world for a man to look her in the eye and see her for her spirit rather than her sad past? And what is more, the Messiah himself has come to her, an unnamed woman, far away from the city, making a new promise by an ancient well. No matter how isolated you are or how lonely you feel, Jesus will find you there. Here, home, or anywhere, in a global pandemic or under any other circumstances, Jesus will find you, because Jesus will always find you. Jesus knows everything that you have ever done. There is nowhere you could go that he would not find you. The next few weeks, I said optimistically, we're going to be very lonely and very stressful for a lot of us, I told you. I wish I could have given you words strong enough to make those weeks fly by in comfortable safety as they turned into months. But I am not magic. I didn't have that kind of power. I still don't. But I promised you that Jesus would be with you, even if you were totally alone in your fort made out of toilet paper rolls and soup cans. I hoped that would be topical and at least mildly amusing, but I'm not sure I could have made anyone laugh that day. For as often as I make you laugh at my hilarious jokes now, you laugh at how funny I'm not. It's fine. It's fine. But as we went into the wilderness of isolation, I also wanted us to remember the water jar that the Samaritan woman left behind in her excitement as she went back to the city to tell others about Jesus. She could trust him to watch over her jar, to protect it, to fill it, to give it back to her when she returned. I promised you that you could leave your jar here with Jesus too. I promised you that no matter how long it took you to come back, Jesus would keep your jar safe. I promised you that no matter when we opened our doors again, Jesus would have your jar here waiting for you. The sanctuary was empty for much longer than the next few weeks I talked about at the time, but we continued to worship God, even in the midst of the wilderness of our isolation, and I promised you that Jesus would be with you, and Jesus was with you. If God could bring forth water out of a rock at the place that the Israelites literally named temptation and strife, then of course God could bring you out of a hard place. If Jesus could satisfy the thirst in a Samaritan woman's soul, of course he could offer you living water too. There are seasons that come and go. There are seasons when we ask God in the desert, "Will you give us a drink?" There are seasons when Jesus finds us at a well in the heat of the noonday sun and asks us, "Will you give me a drink?" There is water in the well. There is water in the rock. There is faithfulness behind God's love. Have faith and believe, and drink all the water you can hold.